Leonarda Cianciulli was the most generous neighbor in town, famous for her delicate tea cakes. But those sweets held a secret that would eventually leave the entire village of Correggio paralyzed with horror. In the quiet streets of Correggio during the autumn of 1939, darkness didn't arrive with violence. It came wrapped in a warm smile, smelling of fresh soap and homemade pastries. This is the story of a town that placed its absolute trust in the wrong matriarch. The disappearances began slowly, as if the women of Correggio were simply dissolving into the crisp autumn air. First went Faustina Setti, a 73-year-old spinster who packed her bags for an arranged marriage and vanished. Months later, Francesca Soavi evaporated on her way to a new teaching job. Finally, Virginia Cacioppo stepped out to meet a theatrical agent and never returned. 3 respectable middle-aged women were swallowed whole by a town where everyone knew everyone else. But there was one peculiar thread connecting their sudden departures. A single unseen detail that investigators would eventually uncover, turning a string of missing persons cases into a waking nightmare that no one saw coming. We are about to unravel a deeply disturbing psychological puzzle, peeling back the layers of a mother's desperate and suffocating love. By the end of this journey, you will see exactly how grief and paranoia can twist a human mind into committing the unthinkable. We will follow the exact trail of breadcrumbs the detectives followed, exposing a chilling conflict between maternal instinct and cold-blooded calculation. You will learn how a deeply held superstitious belief transformed a grieving mother into a calculating predator. And I promise you, when we finally reach the bottom of this twisted rabbit hole and discover where the evidence went, you will never look at a friendly neighborhood bake sale the same way again. Before the disappearances, Leonarda Cianciulli was considered the beating heart of Correggio. After a devastating earthquake in 1930 destroyed her home in Irpinia, she arrived in this northern town seeking a fresh start. She opened a small shop, and almost immediately, her magnetic personality drew people in. To the lonely and the anxious, Leonarda was a trusted confidant. She offered comforting advice, read fortunes, and always had a plate of homemade pastries waiting for her guests. But behind her welcoming smile, Leonarda carried an unimaginable burden of grief. Out of 17 pregnancies, she had watched 13 of her children die. 10 perished in their youth, and 3 were lost to miscarriages. This relentless tragedy left her hyperfixated on protecting her 4 surviving children. Her eldest, Giuseppe, was the light of her life, and there was a dark secret from her past, a terrifying curse spoken on her wedding day, that convinced Leonarda these tragedies were no accident. The illusion of peace shattered in 1939 when the drumbeats of World War II echoed across Italy. Giuseppe, Leonarda's favorite son and her anchor to sanity, was drafted into the Royal Italian Army. For any mother, this would be a source of deep anxiety. But for Leonarda, whose mind was already fractured by the loss of 13 children, it was an absolute psychological catastrophe. Her protective paranoia snapped completely. She became convinced that the battlefield would claim him, finally fulfilling the malicious curse that had haunted her for decades. Desperation drove her to consult dark superstitions and ancient magical beliefs. She concluded that the only way to save Giuseppe's life was through a macabre cosmic exchange. The universe demanded payment, and Leonarda decided she was willing to pay it in blood. She believed that only human sacrifice could create a magical shield strong enough to protect her boy. The beloved shopkeeper began looking at her neighbors as potential offerings. Albertina Fanti was the first to realize that something was terribly wrong. While the rest of the town accepted Leonarda's elaborate stories about the missing women, Albertina remained unconvinced. She knew her sister-in-law, Virginia Cacioppo, would not just vanish without a word. Leonarda had meticulously crafted letters and excuses, convincing families that their loved ones had moved away to find work or husbands, all to keep them from asking questions. It was a brilliant manipulative tactic that delayed the panic for months. If you find these deep dives into the criminal mind as fascinating as I do, make sure to subscribe so you can follow this investigation to its conclusion. Albertina eventually took her fears to the police superintendent, pointing a trembling finger at the most respected woman in the neighborhood. She brought with her a specific financial detail that would change the course of the investigation forever. This small was the first crack in Leonarda's carefully constructed wall of lies. Leonarda's descent into darkness began long before she ever arrived in Correggio. Born in 1894, her life was shaped by a mother who harbored a deep, toxic resentment toward her. Emilia, her mother, had been forced into a marriage after a brutal assault, and she saw Leonarda as a constant reminder of that trauma. This fractured relationship reached a breaking point on Leonarda's wedding day in 1917. When Leonarda married a man her mother despised, Emilia did not just scream. She cast a literal curse upon her daughter. In the superstitious world of rural Italy, a mother's curse was a death sentence. Emilia condemned Leonarda to a life of misery, specifically wishing death upon any children she might have. When 13 of those children actually died, Leonarda did not see a medical tragedy. She saw the manifestation of her mother's dark magic, a debt that she believed would eventually have to be paid in full. The investigation reached a fever pitch when detectives finally searched Leonarda's home. They discovered a trail of financial documents showing that the missing women had signed over their entire life savings just before they vanished. Despite this clear motive, the police were baffled. They found no bodies, no weapons, and not a single drop of blood in a house that smelled perpetually of fresh laundry and vanilla. Leonarda maintained a mask of innocent outrage, playing the role of the neighborhood's grandmother to perfection. But the authorities made a strategic move that shattered her composure. They arrested her eldest son, Giuseppe, on suspicion of fraud. This created a horrific moral dilemma for Leonarda. She was trapped between her own survival and the safety of the son she had killed to protect. It is a choice that forces us to ask, what would you be willing to sacrifice to save the person you love most? The answer would soon lead to a confession. The police simply could not reconcile the evidence with the woman standing before them. Leonarda was short, stout, and middle-aged, appearing more like a harmless baker than a cold-blooded killer. They struggled to understand how she could physically overpower 3 different women and dispose of them without any help or noise. Even when she began to hint at her involvement to save Giuseppe, the detectives did not believe her. They thought she was a desperate mother making up stories to take the fall for her son's financial crimes. They were convinced she must have had accomplices, or that she was merely a con artist who had sent the women away. This disbelief created a thick fog of confusion that nearly derailed the entire case. I am curious to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the police were blinded by their own biases about what a killer looks like? Their skepticism only made Leonarda more determined to prove her gruesome efficiency. Detectives began to re-examine the very first disappearance, that of Faustina Setti, with a new and terrifying perspective. They realized that Faustina had not just left, she had been systematically erased. Leonarda had convinced her that a husband was waiting for her in another town. But first, she made Faustina write letters to her relatives. These were pre-written notes assuring everyone she was safe and happy, intended to be mailed after she was already dead. This was not a crime of impulse or sudden rage. It was a masterclass in cold, calculated manipulation. Leonarda had weaponized the loneliness and the dreams of these women, using their deepest desires as the bait for her trap. The realization hit the investigators that they were not dealing with a grieving mother who had snapped. They were facing a highly intelligent predator who had planned every detail of these murders months in advance, ensuring her victims were forgotten before they were even gone. The breaking point finally arrived when Leonarda realized the police would not release Giuseppe without the truth. In the cold light of the interrogation room, her defensive mask slipped away, replaced by a chilling and prideful calm. She looked the lead investigator in the eye and agreed to tell him everything, but only if her son was set free. What followed was a confession so graphic and detached that it left the hardened officers physically ill. She did not just admit to the killings. She described the process with the clinical precision of a butcher. She explained how she drugged their wine and used an axe to end their lives in the silence of her home. But the most horrifying part was what she did next, a secret ritual that turned her victims into something unrecognizable. If you want to see how this dark story concludes, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. As she led the authorities back to her kitchen, the final, stomach-churning piece of the puzzle was about to be revealed. The full, nauseating horror of Leonarda Cianciulli's crimes wasn't just in the taking of life. It was in her horrifying method of disposal. Standing in her kitchen, she calmly explained how she chopped the victims into 9 pieces, gathering their blood in a basin. She waited for the blood to coagulate, dried it in her oven, ground it into a fine powder, and mixed it with flour, sugar, chocolate, milk, and eggs. She baked them into crunchy, sweet tea cakes. And the flesh? She threw the pieces into a massive pot, added caustic soda, and boiled it down until it dissolved into a thick, dark mush, which she then poured into molds to create bars of soap. She gave this soap to her neighbors. And those sweet, crunchy tea cakes? She served them to the very women who came to her shop to gossip and seek comfort. She even ate them herself. The entire town of Correggio realized with absolute paralyzing dread that they had unknowingly consumed their own friends and neighbors. The trusted matriarch had turned her community into unwitting accomplices in her dark sacrificial ritual. The revelation shattered the community of Correggio. Leonarda was put on trial in 1946. Where she remained entirely unrepentant, even correcting the prosecutor on the specific details of her grisly recipes. She insisted she had done it all out of a mother's pure, desperate love, proudly declaring that she had successfully kept her son alive through the war. The court found her guilty, but recognized her severe psychological detachment from reality. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison and 3 years in a criminal asylum. Giuseppe, cleared of all charges, was released, though he had to live with the unimaginable weight of knowing his mother had slaughtered and served up human beings in his name. Leonarda eventually died of cerebral apoplexy in the women's criminal asylum in Pozzuoli in 1970, taking her darkest secrets to the grave. The chilling legacy of the soapmaker of Correggio leaves us with a deeply unsettling question about human nature. How well do we truly know the people around us? The sweetest smiles can hide the darkest paranoias, and the deepest love can sometimes curdle into the most profound evil. If you found this descent into historical true crime compelling, please subscribe to the channel for more dark journeys into the human psyche. Because the scariest monsters aren't hiding under the bed. Sometimes they are just next door, offering you a warm pastry.